So let's start. I can see a number of people are already done with creating the folders. If you have any issues with creating a folder, please let us know. So as I said, we are going to create a folder called intro to inputs, buttons, and tables. And this is the folder we're going to use for today. If you have created it, for me, I already created it. You can see if I try to create it again, they'll tell me that it already exists. Then we'll need to go into it by using CD. And then I'll press enter. I'm now into the intro to inputs and button tables. I will now open it using my VS Code as we normally do. It's code and a dot, which means you need to open VS Code. You need to open the current directory in VS Code. So now you can see it is now open in my VS Code, and I can always validate that I opened the right folder by coming here and look into the Explorer if I have the other name of the directory. So now we can create inside an index.html plus the readme.html, .md. So these are the two files we are going to have into this code, or actually instead of using index.html, let us pass to inputs.html. And then we create also another one of buttons.html and the other one of tables.html, because these are the three topics that we are going to cover. So if you have all these files opened, so please let us move together. Make sure that once I'm typing, you're also doing the same thing. So we have three files created. We have an inputs.html. We have, because we are going to use that one for the web page for inputs. We also have a buttons.html, which is going to be used for learning buttons, and the other one for tables as well. And the README, where we can write some of our notes. So we never had a chance to actually go deep into Markdown, but as well as we are always, when we are doing our README, make sure that you understand some of the syntax or some of the symbols being used. You should understand them, that is how Markdown works. Like for this one hashtag, this is a heading 1 in Markdown. So I'll just go ahead with introduction to inputs, and then buttons and tables. Then I'll start with this first one with 2 hashtags, which means it's a heading 2. Now I'll just say inputs. This is where we're going to write anything related to inputs. I hope we are together. Please let me know if I'm going too fast, or let me know also if I'm going too slow, because you might have passed through all of this and we are taking too much time on it. So I'll try to go on my own pace. You let me know if I should decrease the pace or increase. So now let us continue. So inputs are crucial elements in web pages, because this is where we write our texts, and input can as well be used as buttons. And this is also where we can use things like color pickers, we can have checkboxes, we can have also radio buttons, we can as well have some ranges, and we can as well also have some specific inputs that might be related to being an input of where you can write in numbers, being an input where you can just write in only emails, and also being an input with a certain valid URL format. So inputs are very crucial, and in most of the web pages, inputs are mostly used. So, and the syntax of inputs is usually written like this. Syntax or tag, it is like this, input, like this. And an input is also a self-closing tag. So I'll just say syntax is this, and it is a self-closing tag or self-closing element. Let us use element to be more specific. Yes. And now Let us now dive into it and see how we can use it in our HTML. So we'll start with the basic structure of HTML. I will ask this question to Agawa. Mark check Agawa. How do we introduce some basic HTML into this page? If I want to just get a basic structure of HTML without taking too much time, what shortcut should I do?
Like check with apostrophe sign, apostrophe exclamation sign,
An
then it shows
exclamation sign, and then it will show one
by
or
two.
three exclamation. You will go on with the first one, right?
Yes.
Click on it, you will get a basic HTML structure. For now, we can delete the metadata. We're not interested in it as of now. And then I'll go ahead with changing the title inputs. And then inside the body, I'll go straight and now put in my input. You can see the syntax is a self-closing tab. So this is a very basic input element. And with the type text, we can even remove the type before we go to attributes. If you try to observe this in our browser, let us see how it will look like. So you can see this is now our basic input. So this is where you can now write in your own words. And you can always control this. This is actually zoomed. If I try to reset this to 100, it will become very small. But I just zoomed it for you guys to be able to see it. So this is a basic input. You can type in words, right? So this is our basic input. And you can see it has something, when you focus into it, it has something which looks like a blue border, and this is what we call an outline. So by default, it has a blue outline. We shall see how we can always change this. And when you hover on it, you can see it has some black color when you hover on it. When you don't hover on it, it is kind of gray. But when you hover on the input, it has a black color on its borders. So these are called borders, which are different from the blue lines. The blue lines are called outlines. We shall look at all of that. So an input is made of an area to write in. It also has a surrounding, which we call a border. And when you focus on it, it has what we call an outline that overlays on top of the border. So I hope all of that was well understood. So now going back to our codes, we can see inputs has an attribute called type. So type is a very important attribute to inputs because this is how you can manipulate different types of inputs. We have around, I think, 20 types of inputs, if not more than that. So we have 20 types of inputs. So let us go with one by one and try to look at how it would look like. So I'll still comment it as a basic input. Then I can go on with the next. I'll be putting BR so that we can have it next to the next line. So what BR does is a break element. It actually brings the other element that follows below, or it actually gives the other element to act as a block element. Block elements are all displayed line under a line, and they are not displayed in line. So just understand that a break helps us to bring the other element under the top one. So now I'll go ahead with our first type, which is a text input. So I'll comment it as a text input. So a text input is an input like any other, but it is strictly for text. So you can write in your text. You can see it here. So let me actually be putting in 2 breaks so that we can have some spacing. So it has no differences from a normal one, because by default, even though we don't have a type there, by default, it's of type text. So that is why you can see they look alike. You can just write in some text. So this is our second input, which is actually the same as the first one, because by default, it has a type of text. So we shall move on with the type button input. And then I'll comment this. and put their input, and then the type, I'll make it a button. So you can see how it looks. Let me bring my breaks again. Here, you'll see how it looks. So if an input is of type button, then it means you have to give it another attribute so that it acts as a button, because you've never seen a button that has nothing in it. You've never seen a button that has no content in it. So every button needs to have a content. Therefore, we're introducing another attribute called value. So this is an attribute to input, and the value actually gives you some space to be able to type in content within your input. So now I'll just go ahead and put in click me. You bear with me. So an airplane is actually passing over us. So it's probably making some noise. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, so I gave it a value of click me, and this value, what it does, it provides content to your input element. As we saw last time, so usually in HTML, we have an opening tag, and between an opening tag and a closing tag. And between the two, there is always what we call content. And in some self-closing elements, we can also have some content in them, if necessary, by using what we call a value attribute. So for those who are not around in the past sessions, attributes, these are keywords that we add to our elements, and these might change the behavior of those elements. Like you can see, the type attribute is contributing to a lot of the behavior, or a lot of the, it's changing the way the input looks like. So this is an attribute, and also the value is an attribute because it's also changing the normal behavior of that input, whereby it is adding content to it. So I've added content as click me, or let's add something you're all used to, submit. Something like that. You're all used to buttons having submit. You can see now it is as a button. You see that? So it's now changing from this to this because of the type attribute. So we can as well give the value attribute to inputs, by the way. If you come here and give value here, you will see that this is a value inside. This is a value inside. Let me reload. So you can see the other value was now entered, and you can as well delete it, but if you refresh again, it will show. But for inputs where you'll need a user to type, therefore you don't need to provide the value unless it is necessary. So we shall remove this. But if you want to provide some content that might be visible to guide the user what they need to type into the input, you can use an equivalence to the value attribute, which is called a placeholder. So like, let's say your first name, you can see you will have something called a placeholder within your input. So the placeholder will always vanish if you start typing. You can see it is gone. So it is actually there to guide you what you need to put in that input. And that one is called a placeholder. So going back to our README, we have input attributes. Let me just show it with 3 input attributes. So we have one called type, changes the look of the input. And we also have a second one called value, gives content to your input. And we have a third one called placeholder. It gives some text within the input to guide the user. So it will just have a purpose of guiding the user to just know what they have to type in this input. So you can imagine if you have inputs without labels, so you need to provide placeholders for your users to know what they are going to type in. Otherwise, they won't know what to type in. So this is how we do placeholders, by using placeholder attribute like this. So you understand you can't use placeholder attribute within type button because there is nothing the user is going to type in, right? So let's move on to, we have around 20 other types to go through. Let's move on to the type checkbox. Checkbox input. So I'll again bring in the breaks to have it more clear. So I'll just go ahead with input and then I'll change the type to being checkbox. So if you start typing, it will actually bring some suggestions. So this is how now a checkbox looks like. You can check and you can uncheck. So this is all done through the input element. You can imagine it has a lot of things. So that is why it is very important in HTML. So we'll go ahead with the color input. Color input. I hope we are moving together, right? If you are moving together, I'm going to ask this question straight away. So the color input, what will be the type? Let me ask this question to Festo, Cavano Festo.
Yes, can you come again, please?
So we are now going to have a color input. We've just seen how we can have basic inputs, text inputs, button inputs, and checkbox inputs. Now we have arrived to the color input. So what type will it be?
Color input.
Yes.
For color input, I'm not sure.
So if we are moving on together, or if you're also writing this within your VS Code, you can, if it is a color input, try to write something like color and see if it will come up. So you can see it actually came up, which means this is the right type of a color input. So please do the same. That is why I told you to along with me. So make sure if you do not have your VS Code open, please open it. Open it and type the same things I'm actually writing to. That is the only way you'll get to learn all of this and understand how it works. Otherwise, you'll be like somebody watching a movie. All right, so if we head to our browser, we can see now how the color input will look like. So it will have a color picker, what we call a color picker, and you can change these colors as you want. And you can as well use this selector to actually move around and be able to grab whatever color you want. I can grab a color of this submit button words. If I click on it, I'll be able to see the color, right? So this is how the color input works. And now let's move on to the date input. I'll put in again the breaks and move on to the date input. So for the date input, we shall again use input. So I saw a question. I saw somebody saying we are moving too fast. Is this too fast? The only thing, guys, the only thing we are changing here, it is the type. Otherwise, the syntax of the element is still the same. It's all input. We are only changing this thing here, right? So let me go slow now. So the date input. So you understand we're now going to change this attribute of type text and it will be something else. So who can tell me the type value now for the date input?
So,
Check.
okay.
Check.
Yeah, it will be date.
So now we're going to have a date value instead of a text value. So if you head over to your browser, you can now try to visualize this and you will see it's a date picker. You can select the day. You can as well select the month. You can even actually type in. I can type in 909, and then I can also type in 2025. 2025. You can always do the same thing. You can even click on it and it opens a date picker. So you can even navigate to today's date. If I click on today, it will actually show today's date, which is 21st August 2024. So this is now a date picker, right? So let me give you time now to go through everything. Make sure you have the same things as I have. 1 minute to make sure that you have the same things as the ones I have. All right, so I guess we're all done with all of that, right? We all have a normal basic input. We also have now an input with a text with a certain placeholder of your first name, maybe also have a button input, a checkbox input, as well as a color and a date picker input. So we are still using the input element. You can see by only changing the type. So this is the only element that has a lot of values related to its type. You can actually use input in so many things. You can use it for date pickers, for buttons, and so on, as we are going to continue seeing this. So we can also have a type of email. It's an input like the same as the text input, but you will see the difference. So email input. So for email input, again, we shall still type input, but again, the type will be email. So if we come and head over to this, we can even actually, since it's an input where you can type in, you can put in a placeholder, your valid email. Placeholder, and it will appear here. So if you type in something that is not valid and try to submit, it's just that we can't submit right at the moment. But what the email input will do, if you try to put in something that can't be a valid email, it will give you an error that it is invalid. It is just that we can't submit this. We don't have a full form so that we can submit, but we shall look at this once we're done with all this type, whereby you will see now how the email input will be totally different from the text input, because it will give you some validation errors that is invalid email and so on. So we shall look at that again. So now let's move on to another type, which is the file input type. This is also so important, file input. So I'll comment this. I'll again bring these placeholders, these breaks, and I'll type in input, and this is going to be of type file. If we head over to our browser, we can see this. Can you all guys see that? This. So it will have all of this by default for you. Choose a file, no file chosen. If I come and click on it, I'll be able now to choose a certain file on my desktop. I can choose maybe an image. If I choose this image, you will even get to see the name of the image. You can again choose any other file that you want. If I click on this, I can see the image. So it's now becoming a file picker. You can pick any file that you want, and you can see the name of it. So this is an input, but being used now as for picking your file. So now, I think it's becoming too much on this page, but it's okay. We shall continue. I'll be scrolling down. Let me put a lot of breaks down here so that we can have some space to scroll to like this. So now let's head over to another input type. So now we are going to look at an input type let's look at an input type of radio. So now I'll say radio button inputs like this. So I'll now have an input like this. Now it will be radio. Let me just remove this. So you will see this is how it looks like. So you can have something like let's say value. You can give it a value of male. Or let me not use value because it won't display here. Let me use some labels. Let me use, I don't want to go into some elements that we haven't studied like div, but let me put a span here and put there male. So, and you can have another one like female, like this. And this will now give you, like you usually see this, you can choose among this. So we are clicking into it and all of them are getting selected because they are not grouped radio buttons. But if you have grouped radio buttons, then if you click on this, it will be selected. If you come and click on this, the other one will be unselected. So, and that is how it normally works. I just gave you an example to realize how they are normally used on genders. So now, let us now go to our other input type. Let us have an input type of, I'm trying not to go through some input types of like telephone number or some inputs of, let's say, search that we can't validate as of now, but I'll go through another type of input called range. This is also some used. So the range, it looks like this. You usually see this on web pages, right? So let's move on. Let me name it range input. So let's look at another one. You can as well, for the dates, let me actually group them together. For the dates, you can actually also have other inputs that are mostly week. And let me have another one that is, which time. Let me have another one of month. So all of these are related to dates, right? Let me just say date and week and month, week, time, and so on. So if you come back here, you can see this is the monthly one, not the other one we saw, and this is only bi-weekly for the weeks, and this is for the time picker, and this is for the month, which is different from this because here you can pick from the month the dates, and from this you can only pick the month, right? So these are all date pickers, if I would say date and time pickers, which have different values to the attribute of type. And you can go through a lot of them if you have time. When you actually do type, let's go at another one and I'll show you how you can see all the types. Let's look at another one called, let me see another one that we haven't gone through that is more important. Let us see the image type. So let us look at input and then we have in here image. So before we type something, if you head over to these quotes and you kind of do control and space, whether you're using a Mac or a Windows, you will actually get to see all the types related to this, all the values related to this attribute of type. You can see the button, checkbox, color, the date, time, local, and the email, the file, the hidden image, every attribute value we have been using, you can actually be able to see it. The tail will be the same as the text input, but it will have some validations related to telephone numbers because telephone numbers are all numbers. They are not strings. They are not like alphabets. So the search is the same as an input text type, but it has also added value whereby you can press enter and it will actually run whatever you've just written in that text box. So, but you won't see it right now. You won't see the difference because we don't have all of that in a form. So now, I think we have gone through a lot of them, except password. We shall also look at the password one because that one it has a difference, which is obvious. So, but as I was telling you, you can always click into this, the value where you write your value and do control and space, you'll be able to see all value of the attribute type. Even other attributes, you can just press control and space. Within where you usually type the value, you'll be able to see what can go inside or what value you can use. So now let's have in an image type and we see how it would look like. So this is an input which can be used for an image. I don't know, it depends on what website or what web page you're building. If you will need to show something like this, you use it. But I personally, I don't usually use it. So let us have, this is the image input. So let us have the password input because this one is important. So for the password input, if you write in input and give it, I will remove these other attributes. We shall come back to them later on. So if I go to the type password, so and I come back, let me try it. It's reloading. Let me refresh this. Let me put in some breaks. Yes, it's here. Let me have in also some placeholder. Type your password. So it will look like this. If I start typing my password, can you see it's the password input? It won't be visible, right? It will be hidden by default and is shown with some dots, which is different from when we do text. You see, if we do text, it will be visible. And actually password also triggers some other web functionalities. Because we had the type of password, you can see it was now starting to trigger this feature of browsers whereby you need to save your password, right? You can see that. So type password is very important when you want to write in passwords to your inputs, right? That is why in most of websites, let's say, let me give you an example of a website, maybe like this. Most of the people, you see them doing this. Let me go to this. Most of the people, you see them, if they type in maybe their email and type in passwords, you see them inspect this password input like this. I hope you can see this. And they will come to something of type password here, and they will change it to text. They change it to text, you can see their password will be visible now, right? So this is just a small hack. If you want to visualize the password or something else, you come and just inspect and look for that input. So if you inspect from what you want to see, if I want to see the email input, I will inspect from the email input. If I want to inspect the password, I will inspect the password input. And then I'll come and look for a type attribute and change it to text, right? But again, if you refresh this, it will come back to its normal thing. Because that you're just using the inspect console, you're not changing the real codes, right? So let us get back to our input. So Those are input types in general. So how many did we look at? Around
Like this?
10. Check.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a curious question. How do you add the feature on the password input type so that the I feature so that you can see the password as you type it
Yes,
into the
that is a JavaScript feature. It involves a lot of JavaScript. And right now we haven't yet studied JavaScript. That is why.
Oh, okay.
Right now, if we go into JavaScript, then we'll look into that.
Okay, no problem.
All right. So we shall look at that in JavaScript because it is also a very, very important to actually have something like that whenever you want. I hope you are talking of this, something like this. Let me see. Let's see. I think I wrote this. I'm trying to look somewhere where it is there. Okay. I wrote the domain wrongly. So you are talking of something like this, right? If you have in your password typed, and you can always press this and it's visible, right? That's what.
Yes.
Yes, this one involves some JavaScript. But again, it's not that too much JavaScript because you'll be changing into type text and again type password. It's actually the same concept as I was saying. It will be changing type text. If you press on the I, for it to be visible, it will be changing it to type text. If you press again on the I for it to be not visible, it will be changing it to type password. So that is the concept. We shall look at that when we start JavaScript.
Oh, okay.
All right, so now I think we've gone through most of the important input types, but again, you can read more about some input types. They're everywhere, but these are the most popular ones and the mostly used ones. All right, so now let's have a simple practice to look into. Let's kind of do a form.html, and we are going to have in only the email and password and then the submit button. So we are going to do this together, and you're going to also learn what we call forms. So you just type form. So what form will do, it is actually not going to do something too much, but these are some of the elements that actually help us to know that this section is related to this. They are called semantic elements. So if you use form, everyone who is looking into your code will just know that all those codes that are in the form are related to a certain form. So I want my form to have an input of type email, right? And then I want it to also have a placeholder of your email. You can do the same. And I'll have also another input with type password. And I want to have it a placeholder of your password. And I also want to have a last input of type submit or type button. Let me just call it button because it's the same thing, by the way. Value, and then I'll give it, let me give it submit, but that's that because we already saw button. I'll give it a value of submit. You see, oh, we are using form. I'll just change this to form. So you see how it looks, right? You can see how it looks. So now I'm going to make sure that I put them on the same, like the input of password should be below the email and the submit should be below also. I'll put in some BR as we saw, but later on when we study CSS, we are no longer going to use BR. So it will now be like this. And as well, you can also put in some label. We have an element called label. You understand it's label the same way you label something. So I'll put your email and I'll show you something very important to the reason why I used label. And I'm going to have this like this. Let's have it like this. Or let's also put there some BR to make sure that this goes down. This also goes down. I hope this is straight. It's not confusing in any way. So it will look like this. So try to see the codes and see if there is anything confusing and let me know if I can explain. So I'm using label to have some labels on top, email, then this one will be password, right? And I'm having our normal inputs. This is the type email and this is type password. So our labels have what we call for. You'll see what this for does actually. I'll tell you in a few seconds. Are you done, all of you, with this? Any questions related to this? I'm just having a simple form with email input and password input and then a button for submit. So I've added a new element called label so that we can have some labels on the inputs. As I said last time, there are some elements we won't be studying or we won't be learning specifically because they work hand in hand with other elements and they're just some simple elements to not take our time. So like the label, you now know it. Like for the BR, you already know it. So for the label, it's just to provide a label. Instead of using the P element, you should use the label element because it has what we call for. And this for, that is what we're going to explain. This is an attribute which is very important in inputs. So the for will take in, let's say this is for email. It's English, right? For password, right? But why do we need to do this? It's to make sure that we connect this label to its input. How do we connect it? By just introducing ID attribute. We give it the same name to this. So I hope this is self-explanatory. So this label is for, it's for this input. And the only thing that can identify that input, it's the ID. As I told you last time, ID is the identification of that specific element. So if we put here an ID of email and we say here for email, it means this label will be belonging to this input. And what is it going to help us? It is going to help us this. Can you see if I click on email label, what will happen? It will automatically focus into the input of that email, right? But if we do it on password, remember on password, we haven't yet applied for an ID. Nothing happens. Can you see that? Can you see that, guys? But if we click on email, it will focus into the email input. Because of this for, it means this label is connected to an attribute. So if we want to connect it again to this also, we'll do for password, and here we'll apply in ID, which is password. And then if we come back here and try to click on the label, you can see it is now focusing into the password. Click here, it is focusing into the input. And these are best practices for the users because sometimes users tend to click on the labels instead of clicking within the input. If they click on labels, now you'll be having them. They can type. If they as well click in the input itself, they can as well type. So you need to make sure that both of them work. So that is why label is very important, which is different from P. The P element, the paragraph element. If we put in the paragraph element, it doesn't have an attribute called for. And guys, please make sure you understand these attributes. It's not like you can write in P here as paragraph and you just give it an attribute of for. It doesn't work like that. You need to understand that the for attribute only is valid for the label element, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So now we have our input like this. So we can write in our email, we can submit. If we submit, you can see what I was telling you, the validations, what they do. They're only triggered once you submit. You can see now because we have a type email, we are getting some validations. Please include an alt in the email address. NJ is missing an alt. If we go on and put in an alt, they will say again, please enter a part of the following A so that we can have a valid email. If we have a valid email, you can see now it didn't give us any error, even though it just submitted by default because forms are made to submit by default. When we study JavaScript, we shall see how we can override the default behaviors. So you can see now you're able to type in everything. If you miss anything from the email, it will give you an error. So that is why we should always use type email, right? And we can as well put in another one called required. This is also an attribute. It can be this. It can be required true or false. But again, if it is true, you don't need to do it like this. You can omit the value and just write required. Is that one understood? So required has a value of true, like this. But you don't have to write it like this if it is true. You just remove it and just do required, like this. Right? Again, I'm mentioning something that might confuse you. So usually an element can be written, self-closing elements can be written like this or like this. You see the difference? For me, when I do command save, because I have prettier, I have something called prettier. Prettier formats codes. When I do save, prettier is going to run my codes and format them. So when I do command save, you will see the BR, this BR will be changed into this. Can you see that? But again, it's the same thing. It can be written with this slash or without a slash. Both ways are valid in self-closing tags, right? So don't be confused when you see mine are getting a forward slash at the end. It's the same thing. It's because my formatting tool is actually formatting them into that way. But for you, I think it will still be like this, even though even if you format. Let's see, you have this format tool, format document like this. It will also change to this, by the way. It's the same thing. I think it's the same thing happening to you. So now I've added a required attribute. Let's see what it does. You understand it's something that now says you cannot submit your form before you kind of put in some values in your input. So let's see. If we submit like this, you can see, please fill out this field. You see that? Because it is required. So all of your fields should have required in case a user shouldn't submit their form without putting them there. You can see the first one will get, please fill. If I fill it with the wrong email, I'll get the validation for the email. If I fill them as okay, remember this input is still required. If I try to submit, they'll tell me, please fill out this field, right? By filling, the error will disappear or the validation will disappear. So that is how usually forms are created. They are put into a semantic element called form to just make sure that, first of all, the user who is going to look into your codes will understand that all these codes are meant for a certain form. And again, this is also good for search engine optimizations. And this is also a good practice. Whenever you're trying to do a form, please try to put it in a form element, right? Any questions here? All right, no questions. So now, let us move on now to our second element. So we are done with the inputs. Let us move on with our second element, which is buttons. Buttons are easy, and you already know how they look like. You can do a button by using the input tag, but again, you can also do a button by using the button element like this. So whatever you put in here, click me. And if you come to our button.html, it will be now button.html, right? Button.html. If you get this error, it means that this element is nowhere to be seen. So it is buttons. I missed an S here. So you can see it is now a button. The same way as we can use input. Input, and we give it type button and the value of click me. Both of them will still be buttons, right? You can see both of them are buttons. So you can either use input of type button to have a button, or button elements. For me, I prefer to use button element. So now the button also has type. It has type submit, type menu, type reset, and type. It has type button, type menu, type reset, and type submit. So what type? I'm going to focus on the three. Type button, it means it is acting as a button, and you can use it for JavaScript to do some stuffs like open a model or trigger something else. But for type submit, it means you'll be using it for submitting your information from the form. Like from here, we can use it here to have type submit. It means that if, then you remember for button, it has the closing and an opening tag. I'll remove this and add like this. Oh my goodness. Let me remove all of this. And then type in submit. And then I'll give it a type submit. So it means if I click submit, it will know that it is supposed to submit information from this form automatically, right? So that is how type submit works. And if we have now a type reset, let's try to use type reset here and we see how it should work. Remember, it's in the form.html. We have in some words, let's say I have a valid email here and click type reset. Do you see what happened? It reset all the inputs. So reset is for resetting all the inputs or removing values in the inputs. So this is what type reset does, right? So I'll come back to my buttons. We have type submit. So this is how we do comments. This is type submit. If I come and duplicate this and do type reset, this is type reset to remove values in your inputs. And if I come and do another one, type button, to interact or to trigger a certain thing. A simple thing would be maybe if I click on type button, I can put there an on-click event. These ones, we haven't yet studied them, of course. And this on-click event can trigger something. Like this is JavaScript. You haven't studied any JavaScript with this, but I wanted to show you that if you have type button, then it needs to go with on-click, because if you click it, it has to do something, right? I hope that one is clear. So now these are our three attribute value for the type button that are mostly used. Type submit is for submitting the form, and this one will mostly work if you have used the form element, because this form element is what makes or what informs HTML that these things are one. If you click on submit, it means it will look into whatever is in the form as input and it will submit that information. But again, you need to remember that for submitting it, you need to have created functionalities of submitting. Maybe it is submitting to your server, or maybe it is submitting to an email address, something like that. So, and for this reset, it will clear everything that is in our inputs. And for type button, it will make sure that it triggers a certain functionality, right? Which we shall see. Anything related to interaction is JavaScript. That one we shall see when we come into JavaScript. That is why we need to make sure that we rush so that we reach to some things that will be helping us in our projects. So now, these are buttons. It's something very simple. You can see, not very hard, right? So now let us go into tables. But let me give you just a 30-second break to arrange your things. So we are going now to go into tables. 30 seconds. All right. I hope we are all ready to move on to our next element, which is tables. So for the tables, we just need again to have some basic structure. We can put in here tables and we can remove these metadata. We don't need them. So if we come back to our README and we go to our, let me write in some notes here, by the way, I forgot. So we go to our buttons. We have also types of buttons, which include submit, reset, and button types. And the syntax is like this. For a button, it has a closing and opening tag. So submit maybe, and this one would have type submit. You understand, if you have in a word of submit, then it should be type submit. And you can as well have reset, and you give it reset form. You can as well have in button and give it open maybe a model, right? So these are some of the types. These are some of the types of buttons. And now we have moved on to tables. So in simple words, what a table is, you already know what a table is, because we all of us know English, right? So a table in HTML consists of some table cells inside rows and columns, right? So it is something, or it is, should I call it a diagram that contains cells inside rows and columns. So we shall now see how we can create a table in HTML. So let me just now have a table, a simple table. So constructing a table, we first of all, we begin with the parent element for tables, which is table. Very simple to understand. And the table, what does a table contain? A table contains some rows, it also contains some columns and so on, right? So the next element should be a table row, TR. TR means table row, right? So inside the table row, we have some what? What do we have inside the table row? I need somebody to explain. What do we have inside the table row?
I think the table data.
We first of all need to have some table headers inside
Okay.
the table row on top. You see how a table is usually arranged. Do I have a table? Let me show you a table. Yes, this is a table, for example. This is a table, right? So this is a table row. All this line is table row. And these ones are called table headers. And they called table headers. That is how we normally call them, right? These are table headers. And then let's say we have a table header of name, phone number, and email. Let's do that. Table header of phone, table header of name, and then you can also have another table header of email. You can as well have another table header of, let's have phone number, and then email, like this, right? So if you try to visualize this, let us head over to our HTML page and put there tables.html. Do you see some table headers are now displayed, right? And they are mostly, why are we getting, yes, why are we getting this email on top here? Did I go on the right thing? Tables.html.
Is not in a table.
I'm not seeing it where it is.
T-body.
Let me,
Email in the
You
table.
can check below phone number, there is email.
name, phone number. Oh, I just wrote T-body instead of TH, sorry. So TH, I was wondering where that thing is coming from. So now we have our three headers. There is a name, phone number, and email. So these are our table headers. So now right after putting our table headers within our table row, we should have now what we call another table row that should have what? Table rows are these. This is a table row, this is a table row, this is a table row, right? But in the first table row, we should have headers, right? So that is why we had to use table headers. But a second table row, we should not have headers. We are going to have in table data, right? Let's say I put in my name. Let's say I put in another name, maybe Agawa Emmanuel. I put in another name, table header. I put in maybe Salim. So these are for table headers of what? I mean, these are table data of what? Who can tell me this? So if we go back to our browser and try to look at this, we should have these now displayed on the same line because they are inside a table row. But is this perfect? Is this how we should do it?
Not.
Remember, this is a table row, right? It should match with its table headers. So therefore, we should have, let me just duplicate this. By the way, you should look for a shortcut to duplicate within your VS Code. Right now, I've duplicated these to 3. And then this means I should delete this. Oh, I should delete actually this and that. And here I should remain with the first one. And here I should remain with the last one, right? So this is our first table data for the name. We should include another table data for now for the phone number. So this is going to be, I'm actually going to use the same phone number. Listen, this one. So again here, I'll have another phone number. Maybe let's change it to 5 like this. Again here, I'm going to have another phone number, which is like this. Then I'll move on again and go on email, right? So now the email will be again with the table data of maybe nj@gmail.com. Then I'll copy the same thing. In your VS Code, you can always copy by just pressing anywhere from that line. You don't need to select like this. If I press my cursor here, it means if I copy, I'll copy all of this. So I'll just press the cursor here and copy this. I'll paste it in here. And then I'll have it as Agawa. And then I can also copy it here and I can have it as Salim. Salim like this. So it means I have 3 table rows, right? 3 table rows. And the fourth one is the table row containing headers. And inside the table rows, I have data corresponding to each table header, right? So if I come back here, I can see my name, the phone numbers, the email. So this is a table, but again, it is not well structured, right? Because we don't have any styles to it. I hope you can see that. So, and this won't be a real table in a real project because you need to give it some borders and so on, right? So if we try to put some, let's put some simple styles and just say maybe border, just give it a border of 1 pixel. I just miswrote border wrongly. 1 pixel solid red, like this. You can see it has now a border around it. If I come here and maybe put on this table row, I can put also a header on the table row. I mean a border on the table row. Did I do it correctly? I can put some header, I mean some border on the TH, but again, this is not how you're going to do it in real life, because in real life, you won't be applying styles like here, and so on. You're going to be applying styles to every TR, to every TH by using a separate file of CSS. So I was just showing you that we will later on give it some borders and so on when we start doing the styling and so on. But for now, just get this. Let me remove even this one. For now, just understand that this is how we do tables, even though they are without borders. Borders, I mean these black lines and so on. So right now they are without borders, but again, we shall come to application of borders and any other things when we study CSS. So which is actually also bringing us to something else that we shall introduce next time in our next session, which is Friday, we are going to look at CSS. So please make sure you go with in mind that for the next session, we are going to have CSS and start reading about CSS. So this is how we connect our CSS. We usually connect our CSS by using link. When you start typing link in your header, in your head, because there is also another element called header. Let us not confuse them. So head is an element that is a section above the body. So in our head element, we can type in link, and you can see there are different types of link. When we have link atom, it means it's a link with a type atom. When we have link CSS, it's a type of link with CSS. So we shall click on CSS like this. You can see it now gave us this. It gave us the relation is REL is relation. It's style sheet, and the href is the path of that CSS. So let us create a new folder like CSS. So inside the CSS, let us have in styles.css. The reason why I'm doing it like this is for you to understand well how usually folders are actually their paths are predicted, or their paths are written. So usually we can have it outside the folder, not in the folder, but I usually like to put it in folders so that you understand well how you can reference also folders. So in my href, I will know that my style.css is not in the current directory my HTML file is, but it's in a folder called CSS. Therefore, I need to put there a dot and a /, meaning current directory. Then I should start getting some suggestions. They are showing me all the files that are in my current directory and even folders that are in the current directory. I have button as you see it here, the folder CSS as you see it here. So I'll click on CSS, then they'll give me another suggestion, then click on styles.css. Let's assume in case they don't give you suggestions, you should also be able to do this. This means current, then you enter into the folder of CSS like this. Then you should now be able to move onto the real file, which is styles.css. So CSS files are written with an extension of CSS, which means cascading style sheet, right? Cascading style sheet. So we shall get to know what all of that means once we are into the session of CSS. But just know that we reference our CSS file like this. So then in our CSS file, we can write in any CSS. So CSS is usually referred to a tag or a class name or an ID or even an attribute. So let's start with a simple thing, a tag, like body. So here, if I write the body, it means I want to style the body. The body is everything you see on your web page. So if I want to style my body, I write whatever, which is called the selector. The selector can be a tag, it can be a class, it can be an ID, it can be an attribute, it can even be a type of a type. It can even be a child or a parent. We shall look at all of that. So if I put their body, the next thing that should follow, it's two curly braces. And inside your curly braces, this is where you write your styles. And the style is made up of a property and a value. One property can be background color, and the value, it's the value to that property. The background color can be maybe, let's put there black, right? This is the background color. If I come and check, I'll see black. And I'm not actually seeing my content because the content is also black. When I want to change the color of the content, I'll put there another property called color, which changes the color of text. I'll put it to white. Then you can see my content is now visible because white is visible in black, right? So this is how CSS is usually done. So this was just something to show you. And for that, we shall go deep into our next session. So please go through it. You already have the resources. I sent you some resources in the capstone project. There are resources. If you move down to the table, there are some resources, even videos you can watch. So this is it for today. Before we end our session, I will come some questions. Please, if you have questions on what you have learned, please ask before we call it a day.
So may I check?
Yes, yes, please.
So for the form.html, my reset button is not working. So
Where?
why?
Here.
In the form.html.
Yes, your
So
button is not working.
yeah, reset button is not working.
Did you put it in the form? Is your everything put in the form element?
Oh,
If
not.
you
I
don't
don't
put it
have.
in the form element, I told you that one won't work. Because the only thing that will let this button do whatever thing it needs to do, it's for it to know that I am handling these things which are in this section.
Okay.
So they all have to be put in the section of form. That is why form is very important. Because if you don't put it in the form, then we need to know what to reset. It won't know what to reset. Right? Even the validations won't work. That is why when we were studying inputs, they were not working because they are not incorporated in a form and they didn't have a button to submit. So always make sure that you put a form and then have everything inside. That is when your button will know that I need to reset these inputs, which are in this form, right?
Okay, I see.
Yes. Any other question? All right. So if there are no questions, I think everything is clear. Are you guys working on your capstone project? So this is your capstone project. Let me go to it actually. This is the capstone project. Are you guys working on it? These were the resources I was talking about. These are the resources. These are resources for project management. You can click on the links, resources for version control, and also resources for front end. Apart from the normal videos we give you guys on YouTube, there are also other resources. You can see all the resources are here. So please go through them and read through the capstone project and start working on it. Like right now, you can start working on the homepage. You can even start actually structuring, even though we haven't yet started CSS, because CSS is going to be much of styling your work. But as of now, you can even be looking onto how you're going to be structuring your web pages and so on. Even having an idea of how your portfolio will look like. Because this capstone is for you to create your own portfolio, your own website that will brand you, right? So
Yes.
look into it. I shared this and it is even pinned in the group. Try to look at what is pinned in the group. There is a Zoom link. There is also this file is pinned. I saw somebody pinned it. So try to look in the group. And yeah, I think this is it for today. If there are no more questions, I'll just stop recording so that I can make the attendance.